Fill to Capacity, where heart, grit, and irreverent humor collide. A podcast for people too stubborn to quit and too creative not to make a difference. Hi, I'm Pat Benencaza, and welcome to Fill to Capacity. You know, some days the world feels a little loud, so it's a gift to sit down and talk about the quiet magic of making. Episode 108, Shaping Sound, the Master Craft of Nina Poots. My guest today, Nina Poots, is a luthier whose hands shape more than instruments. They shape legacy, story, and sound. Nina, born in the Netherlands, made her way to Scotland, drawn in by the smell of wood shavings and the pull of working with her hands. She trained at Glasgow Clyde College, then earned first-class honors at the renowned Newark School of Violin Making in England, a place steeped in old world craft and some serious tradition. Now, in the Scottish Highlands, Nina builds and restores instruments with care, precision, and a bit of wonder. She calls herself a proud queer, sober, extroverted introvert who names her violins after Welsh enchantresses. Nina's story is one of deep listening to wood, to instinct, and to her deeper calling. Her work isn't just a skill, it's a vocation. Okay, welcome, Nina. So nice to have you here.
That's quite the intro. Thank you very much for having me.
It's well earned, Nina. I'd like to start. Can you take us back to that first glimpse into the violin workshop right after you bought your double bass? What did you see, smell, or feel in that space that told you, oh, this is it, this is my path?
Yeah, it was a pretty magical moment. I was very fortunate in my early 20s to come into some inheritance money. So I was able to buy my own double bass, which when you're that young is pretty wild. And went to a bass maker in Holland, and he had the classic like big shop front, so double basses lining the wall, and I had a couple to try out. And then I found my double bass, and this was kind of before the whole like banking apps and stuff like that. So it was internet banking was starting to become a thing. And because as a new customer, it's like, could you pay the whole sum in one go? As well, if I can borrow your computer, sure. So through the shop front, we went through the workshop, through his garden, into his house to get into the laptop. So that moment of like transitioning from quite a clean and pristine shop front to all of a sudden this chaotic workspace, it was just, yeah, pretty enchanting, I think is a good way of saying it, especially with double basses, big instruments. So he had several benches and he had multiple projects on the go, and he was seeing instruments in different stages of repair. And like you said, the smell of wood shavings, you know, when you get a visceral reaction to stuff, and it's just like, oh. And like I was used to a level of creativeness because I was at art school at the time, so I was becoming a teacher, so I had to know a little bit about everything because I was doing all these different mediums actually. So I was familiar with woodworking, but I think this was just like another next level. I've come to realize later in life that it's not just the smell of fresh wood, it's also an old instrument smells. Sometimes nice, sometimes not so nice. I've currently got an instrument on my workbench that
I can tell you, you walk into my studio, you can always smell freshly cut wood because I'm building 3D paintings and using the saw. That smell, there's something about it.
because you're used to it now. I'm used to it now. But every time I get someone to come into my workshop, that's one of the first things they're like, oh, it smells so great in here.
Now, you mentioned you trained as an art educator in Amsterdam before moving to Scotland. What did violin making give you that art school didn't?
I'd like to say I was 16 when I applied for art school. I was 17 in my first year. I was a very young student. And I very much remember feeling really like out of place because like everyone in my class is significantly older than I was, and everyone, because they were a bit older, they had just a different level of skill already because they've had done stuff before. And I was so new to everything. I always felt a bit not good enough, I think. But what I really enjoyed, but simultaneously found really difficult in art school, especially because of becoming an educator. Like I said, I had to know a little bit about everything. And it's interesting, one of my lecturers during one of our assessments made a comment about every time you start something, I get the sense that you don't stick enough time into it to get really good at it. I always did like okay. I was a bit of a master of everything. I
Mm-hmm.
took to things very quickly, but then I get bored very quickly as well, or I get distracted or whatever. You're 18, you're 19, you're 20. You got other stuff going on in life. It's really interesting to think back about that particular assessment because it didn't say it in like a mean way. It's like I see a lot there that's not going anywhere just yet. And
Hmm.
he himself was a wood whittler. He made spoons and stuff. And he was always trying to get me to make spoons. Go away with your spoons. So finished art school, got stuck in a dead end job because Dutch government at the time cut a lot of funding in the art school and education system. So a lot of teachers stayed in their place, so the job market kind of froze over. I was unemployed for about 5 months and then ended up in a kind of minimum wage service industry job just to keep myself afloat. And I was like, oh Christ, what am I going to do? I can't do this for like another 5 years because I think that was the prognosis of a friend of mine who was in education. She's like, yeah, within the next 5 years, the old guard is kind of retiring. I was like, oh my God, 5 years of service industry until I find a job, what I've studied for. Nope. I was a musician. I always played bass. I knew luthiers. A friend of mine was actually a guitar maker. And I just remember hanging out with him, being like, "How do you become a guitar maker? How do you do this?" He went a very traditional route, as in he worked for another guitar maker for about 10 years as like an apprentice and became blah. And then he became self-employed. And he said, so there are also schools because it's quite hard to find luthiers to willing to take you under the wing. It's a big commitment. And usually pays pretty shit. So he mentioned a couple of schools in Europe, and because I was like, oh, maybe bass making. That sounds fun. I'm a bass player. I can make basses. That seems fun. Maybe start small. There's quite a few schools throughout Europe. I think one of the most well-known places everyone wants to get to is Cremona. That was just out of reach, very expensive. I got a bit of a machismo vibe from it. Germany felt a bit conservative where it was. France was really hard to get into. I didn't really speak French. I ended up finding, I think it was Merton College, which is also quite expensive in London. And I remember emailing them being like, hey, any grants that you can do for European students? And they're like, no, there's this school in Glasgow, Scotland, that is free for European students. Oh, great. So I went and looked up and applied and was granted an interview pretty much straight out the gate, which was quite wild.
Let me stop you because that was my next question. After you finished your studies, you joined two luthiers at the Storybook Instrument Workshop in Glasgow, a shared space dedicated to building and restoring stringed instruments. So, what happened? I mean, here you end up going there, and it sounds like you put a lot of work into finding out what was available, what was out of reach, but you just kept plowing through.
Yeah, I think so. I was 24 by the time I decided to uproot life and just go somewhere else. Without getting too personal, I was very stuck in Holland. A lot of people say, "Oh, Holland's really nice. Oh, people are lovely." I was like, "Yeah, we're really nice to tourists, but Dutch people amongst one another, different feet." There's the Dutch directness that I think I've always quite struggled with. And there's not for me, it felt there weren't a lot of opportunities in Holland because everyone always felt a bit like, oh, everything has been done before. Like, you couldn't really pitch an idea. It's like, or why do you want to become a violin maker? This people reacted a bit funny. So I think moving abroad to do that was just a kind of a way for me to go like, let's just see. I'm young enough to kind of go. I'm very fortunate that I had very supportive parents. They were like, if this is what you want to do in life, we'll support you and we'll just have a stab at it. Worst case scenario, you come back, like it's fine. And I went to Glasgow Clyde College not knowing I would stay in Scotland. I very much thought, right, this is a 3 year course. I'm going to do that and go back to Holland.
Well, Nina,
But
I gotta say, that's gutsy as hell. I mean, it's not like moving to another part of the Netherlands.
yeah,
You just up and went to a totally different country. That's not a small pivot. That's a big
yeah.
deal.
I think I don't give myself enough credit for that because it's just like for me there wasn't another way. I think if I would have stayed in Holland, I would have gone down a particular route that was just destructive for me. I mean, it took a couple of years before I fully sobered up. So, like in Scotland, like just the drinking culture in England and Scotland is quite steep as well. So, being a young 24-year-old, way I slotted into that very well and perhaps a bit too well. But despite everything, like I met the guys that I ended up sharing the workshop with in Glasgow Clyde College, and I was very lucky to get a place, but it was also kind of a done deal because when I applied, I was the only woman and I was the only violin making student. So I ended up moving in 2016, starting a course in a country that I've never been before, besides that one interview, in a group full of guy guitar making students. And I was just like, oh, okay. The first 4 months was really hard because you're in a country where you're speaking a second language essentially a whole day. I wasn't used to that either. So I was so knackered at the end of the days. It's that just I remember coming home to my little flat and like living on my own for the first time. So I always had flatmates in Holland, just living on my own. It's kind of like sitting on the couch going like watching telly, thinking like, I can't understand these people anymore, like needing subtitles because I was so tired. And still to this day, when I'm a bit tired, the subtitles come on. Even though now I speak English pretty much all day, every day, and it's fine.
It seems like you just can't help yourself. You just like kind of like go off and blaze a trail.
That's yeah, it's both good and bad ways. I think another lecturer in art school had referred to me as a bit of a projectile. I guess when harnessed correctly and quite productively, but sometimes I can veer off path a little bit. I've definitely gotten better. I think like moving away from the city has definitely helped. Like living where I live. I live in rural Highland Scotland. It's just stunning. And I moved there midwinter, so it was very grey and very wet and very dark. And I was like, oh no. And then slowly, kind of end of February when it's in bulk, I always keep a good eye out on what's happening. I could actually see the seasons changing. You can take more time because yeah, Highland time is a bit slower. I always joke like you can just see stuff happening. And I remember in April because there's a beautiful waterfall trail about it's like an hour and a half walk. It's near my house, so I do that pretty often. So to have walked that like repeatedly over the months so many times, and then one time I have quite a long day at the workbench and I was a bit stressed and all right, oh, I'll just go out for my mental health walk. Went in, and it's end of my street, and you go down a little path, and there's a line of trees, and then there's a big ring of oak trees. And I all of a sudden noticed that everything had just exploded in green, and I was a bit delirious from working. I just remember just walking around cackling to myself, like, it's finally spring. I get a lot out of living here, and that translates into my work as well. Don't get me wrong, I really enjoyed having a separate workshop in Glasgow. It was very, very good. Like I traveled to get to my workshop every
Hmm.
day and I had a space and like it was creative in a very different way. there's a level of you can only do so much because then I have to go back home. That took about an hour every day.
I have to tell you, I understand because I live in St. Paul, but I had my studio downtown Minneapolis, which I would
Oh,
drive to back and forth. But there came a time when I got a little house, and the
mhm.
first thing I did was I had an old rickety garage. I got a couple guys to backhoe it, get rid of it. I drew the blueprints, and I made my
Mhm.
studio. It looks
Yeah.
like a garage, but it's a studio. And so I commute 10 feet from the house to the studio. And in Minnesota, when you get these minus 40 wind chills and
Wow, yeah.
and snow up to your head, you just shovel your way to the studio. And I love that. So there is something to be said about living in proximity or in a studio space.
I very much like my workbench currently is in my kitchen. Perhaps it's a bit too a
Well,
bit too close. So I'm
it's
pretty good
close.
at I'm personally really good at compartmentalizing. Like it's all basically on one end of the wall as well. And I can shut it off. I've never been one of those people that has to be in the workshop from like 11 to like 9, 10, 11 in the evening. I was like, no, I'd rather be there kind of 9:30ish till about 4. I've got enough steam to
But you
have
you know, you bring up a good point. When I was in art school, the motto was that you put 12, 15-hour days in your studio. Well, you know what? As a professional artist, no, I don't
no, it's
have to do
not.
that.
No.
I love how you said if you're working, you just get up, you go out and you walk. And I think there's a very, very important self-care component to a lifetime of being a creative, not just a flash in the pan, but if you're nurturing a lifetime of creativity, so you take walks and you do whatever you need to do for your mental health as well.
Yeah, and like it's coming back. Like, so you have long, dark, cold winters as well. Like you're just there's a different level of functioning in winter as well. And it's I think when you live in a city where everything is a bit contained, like the seasonalness of life disappears. And I think that's why people can burn out a bit more quickly or a bit more aggressively. And like I had to tell myself at some point, like it's okay for me to be ready at like 4 because it's dark out and I just frankly want to curl up on the couch with a book. Or I was like, oh, it's going to be dark at 4 p.m. And it's now, I have 20 minutes to chop my wood for this evening. Like, I have to prioritize a little bit. But yeah, taking care of what you do as a creative is, I think, is very important. I don't think it's something that's taught in colleges so much. And I think any type of art school or any type of craft school or any type of music school, it's a bit of a bubble. I think when I think back about my time, I think very specifically to Newark, the Newark School of Violin has a that was a big bubble of like just a constantness of like having to make, and especially in your second year you do a big of restoration stuff as well. And then I also had the weirdness of the pandemic happening in my second year, like
Yeah.
everything like ground to a halt as
Yep.
well. And it was like, oh wow, what do we do? I think it is very important to listen to your own mental health, but also listen to your body. Like, what can you do? Violin making it is quite physical, especially if you
Yeah.
make new instruments. I think repairs are more mentally a bit draining. I say this as the last 3 weeks I've got 3 big restoration projects on the bench at the moment. And before that, I had like smaller repairs and I did a lot of my own making. So it's like after about the first week, I'm exhausted of all this problem solving and being incredibly careful. I want to rough arch some cello backs or whatever. But yeah, it can be really physical what we do. I've had too many times in college where you have a certain deadline and you have to be quite quick about something that you just overdo it physically as well. It's not sustainable. Like I absolutely adore cello making. It is wonderful because it's bigger. You can see it a lot better. There's more material that you can like manipulate more. there's more material that you can remove or tweak than, because violin's so small, you can only tweak it because then it just gets too small. Like, the kind of, that's it at some point. But with cellos, there's just a lot more, which is simultaneously a bit annoying because sometimes it's never ending, but it's very physical. Like, and I can't do full on cello work every day, for
Yeah.
example. I would love to, but I'm physically just not strong enough.
You're talking about each creative finding their own way of making. And
Mhm.
that leads me to artists reinvent themselves. Writers take on new names like Samuel Clemens became Mark Twain. Creative people shape shift when something inside demands it. And for you, was becoming a luthier a reinvention or more like coming home to who you always were?
That's a good question, actually. Ooh.
Well, we're talking artist to artist, so we can talk like this.
I wonder what I would have said, like starting out as a violin making student, and how that would be different from now. I think if you were to have asked me this question when I was just starting out at Glasgow Clyde College, I'd probably say, "Oh, I'm reinventing myself." Like I went away from Holland, and I think now that I'm in my early 30s, and I have made very specific decision on how I want to run my business, how I want to run my life, where I live. It's like, oh, maybe it is a bit more like becoming myself. Yeah, and I think because in your introduction, it's the line about being an extroverted introvert. I adore living on my own in the middle of nowhere. And like I don't drive either, which is a bit wild. Everyone in this area has and needs a car essentially. And everyone always goes, how do you get by?" So I think a lot of locals take pity on me. Like I get a lot of lifts and like I get a lot of stuff randomly delivered to my door and like I get by. It's quite common for me to go days without chatting to anyone. And then all of a sudden I get a bit antsy and it's like, I need to speak to a human. I'm a little bit too excited for calling the postie, like I'm the delivery guy. I recognized that from when I was really little. My mom was always really annoyed that I would either spend the entire day watching Disney movies or spend the entire day daydreaming inside. And I was like, I don't know. I now basically get to daydream in a sense, just whilst I'm working on something. Perhaps I'm making my little me very happy by being surrounded by beautiful nature and just doing stuff that I quite enjoy doing.
I was reading this about you and I thought this was fascinating. You named your recent violin after a Welsh goddess of transformation and inspiration. Okay, I got to tell you quite honestly, Nina, I was trying to pronounce this word. I even went online. How the hell do you pronounce this word? I'm not going to do it. I'm just so
I
so
mean,
I'm
I
going
can say it. I can
I
say
was
it,
going
but
to ask you, will you say it? Because I wasn't going to tell you the backstory. I wanted to be very sophisticated and say, oh, yes, please tell us her name. But you
so
now know the
I
backstory. Go ahead.
so Welsh is a completely different language from English as well, and Welsh is one of the oldest languages I think in Europe. And there's a lot of sounds in Welsh that I have a certain familiarity with because I'm Dutch and we have a lot of like throat noises and sounds and like rolling R's. But Welsh is very difficult. It's very like in the front of the mouth and stuff. So I think the name is pronounced Ceridwen.
Okay, listeners, I'm going to spell that for you. Ceridwen. Okay, so you built her in both Glasgow and the Highlands. Number one, why the name? And as you were building this violin, did she surprise you?
I name all my instruments, and it's not just after Welsh characters. I've had a cello named Lilith, for example. Yeah, the Greek goddesses as well. I tend to have names of characters that might be a bit misrepresentative or not entirely understood within a patriarchal society. Yeah, the transformation one, like Ceridwen, it's like I can't even say that I know the name as soon as I start making an instrument. It sometimes takes till the very, very last end before I that a name comes to me, and like I do research mythical characters and see which one kind of like piques my interest. But that particular instrument was, I think, it was the smallest violin I've made so far. It was the second model inspired by Amati, which is a family of historical makers. So I usually I pick a maker and like pick one of their models and like I use it as like a starting point. I'm not a perfect copyist. I'm not a bench copyist, as that's called. That's a different level of skill that I admire but have no personal interest in. But I think with Caridwen, it was the first instrument that I felt really comfortable just making. And I was able to perhaps shake loose a little bit of the I should do things a certain way. It was more informed by a level of let's just see what happens. And I think wood as a medium is really tricky to work with because sometimes, as you might know, it's very lovely to work with and it carves beautifully and it does exactly what you want. And other times it's just really hard, it's really tough, or it's really nice to work with in one way, but then you do another process and it's completely does not what you want it to do. So yeah, I think, and it was definitely a bit of that, and like having the opportunity of making like so I started making that violin in Glasgow, and funnily enough, I made parts of Caridwen in the house that I'm currently in before I even moved in. So I had friends of mine who lived in this house before I did, and then when they moved out, I was like, "Oh, what's happening to the little cottage?" And they were like, "Oh, we already gave your name to the landlords." Oh, all right. Oh. So again, like all the stars kind of align. So yeah, it was pretty magical to then have an instrument that was at the time fully assembled but not varnished yet, that has been in this space before. So then, yeah, I moved in here and I got really lucky. I sold an instrument before I moved, so I didn't have to look for work immediately. I had a bit of a buffer. So I could spend some time just varnishing that the way I wanted it to be. Oh, I'm varnishing. Me and varnishing don't gel. Every instrument, I try a different technique and tried a different varnish, but I was pretty pleased with how it all turned out.
It's interesting that here you were constructing this violin at the same time constructing your life in this new place.
Mm, yeah.
Talk about, art mirroring life. There you have it. Now, a lot of people think of violins as finished, delicate objects. What does it actually feel like to bring one to life from raw wood? As an artist, I am dying to hear your answer.
I say there is a spectrum of instrument making and instrument makers. You have one end of the spectrum, and it's a complete sliding scale, in my opinion. There's the one end of the spectrum, which is incredibly well engineered. People try and they very heavily measure everything. They try and make the same thing over and over again. They try and have the same wood from the same tree. It's very methodical and almost just very engineering. And then the other end of the spectrum, it's very wishy-washy and it's a bit like, oh, you move with the wood and I only use a spruce that's been felled at moonlight from the Alps and I soak my wood in the bog because insert whatever. And I'm like, I'm at neither end. I'm a little bit in the middle, I think, which sounds incredibly centrist to me, but I enjoy some level of engineering because I keep forgetting that this is engineering to a certain degree. I actually make a thing that has like engineering behind it because it needs to work. Like the fact that it's arched is that people have thought about this for centuries and it works because all violins roughly look the same, and that's I'm going to piss people off in the trade by saying that. They're all roughly violin shaped, but they all sound slightly the same, but also very different. It's very objective sound. But I also enjoy the more kind of wishy-washy, as in, yes, I do believe that sometimes the material moves you in a certain direction. Like if because flamed maple, which is like the traditional woods used for the back and sides and neck, the more flamed it is, the harder it is to bend the ribs, for example, because it just doesn't want to. So that is, yes, it's a level of engineering, because a bend structure can be really strong, but it's also incredibly like physically demanding to just sometimes wrestle it in place. And I used to hate bending ribs. And then after I've done my first set of cello ribs, it just clicked. And I was like, oh, I just need to throw my entire body weight around while I'm doing this. And since then, I actually, it's one of my favorite things to do, because it feels so powerful, because it's such a physical dance almost. And I've gone from it taking sometimes days to sometimes being like, yep, that's 20 minutes. That looks good. Glue in place. Don't touch it. Don't leave it alone. Don't even look at it. There's a level of magic in making that. I think a lot of people from the outside, they romanticize that and they think that's happening all of the time, when it isn't. There's bits that are really annoying. There's bits that you have to get right, and it's quite precise, and it's quite. Another example I give a lot was like, instrument making is quite harrowing, because every step takes a lot of time and skill to do something, and then the next step of this making, like you spend hours doing like squaring up a neck blank. That's a very specific engineering thing. Everything has to be perfectly square to and in relation to each other. And then the next step, in order to make the scroll and the neck, you have to cut out the profile. So you have to cut into the perfect squared thing bit of wood that you've just made. So it's that level of like, oh, I'm cutting into this thing that I've worked 16 hours on or whatever. Like, and the same with scroll carving. You work in facets, and you're removing material.
Yeah.
And it's that fine balancing between not removing too much, but also not leaving on too much. I went to a course recently. It's the movement of confidence, or something along those lines, about like, sometimes you just have to, instead of taking like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 cuts to do the thing, which gives you lots of facets, you sometimes get 3 cuts, that's it, boom, 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 just. And that kind of level of confidence, it's a
But,
bit
but I
scary.
like that. I like that. The
Yeah,
movement of confidence.
yeah, right.
Yeah, that says it right there.
And I think something that I've realized as well is like, working with your hands is quite magical. Like, there's a
Oh,
reason I wanted to become an educator in art, because I think it's very valuable for people to see the result of your skill getting better in real time, in situ, and right in front of you. I think, especially for children, it's really important to see yourself getting better at your fine motor skills. I also really understand that it's really daunting for a lot of people. It's very daunting for artists, the sense of like, I don't feel good enough. Like, again, 16-year-old, 17-year-old me in art school, like, oh, I can't paint like this person who's in their 30s and has been painting for 15 years.
yeah,
Ridiculous to me, that comparison. But I remember someone in art school saying, like, you don't start with confidence, you work towards confidence. Like, the
yeah.
more you do a thing, the more repetition you do things, the more comfortable you get with stuff, and the better you get at it as well. Translate in everything. It's like, even to down to the tools that you've got. Like, I was really lucky when I started as a student that my dad, who is a crafts person himself, more of a hobby crafts person, but like, he's always grown up, he basically renovated the house that I grew up in from like start to finish. I lived on a building site till I was about 12. And my dad did everything by himself, and he's a civil engineer by training. So my dad realized how important it was to have good tools from the beginning. So instead of starting in Glasgow Clyde College with like a borrowed toolkit for the first year, he bought me basically the basic luthier toolkit, which is great. So I
Wow.
had that advantage of starting with quite good tools. But then another thing that actually honed my tool skills and my knife skills and my gouging and my chisels was when I started buying a lot of old tools. Newark in England, it's a market town. It's very quaint. It's very conservative. It was very pro Brexit, so that was fun as a European.
Oh,
But it had a great market town. and it was a town square around, and they had a lot of stalls. And there was one stall was a guy who sold old tools, and I think especially in the UK, there's a lot of old steel that's beautiful. And like you buy a tool in a bit of a state, and going through the process of cleaning up all the surfaces and regrinding bevels and then sharpening it, you learn the steel of your tool. And sometimes it takes a bit of figuring out, like, because it's a different tool, then it's a different steel than you're used to, and it's like this is a lot tougher, so it's really hard for me to sharpen that by hand. But at some point when you've done it for a while, the penny drops and you're like, oh, I can apply this much pressure on this, and then all of a sudden you can get it so sharp. Oh, there's nothing more delicious than a sharp tool.
Oh, I listen, I understand. But when
Mm.
you talk about confidence and being in school, one of the myths of art school I can remember is somehow that you go to school and your creativity and genius will burst forth, and there you have it, and that was the expectation. Now, on the other side of that, when I taught art, I would tell students the first day, you are here to grow your talent and to grow into your talent. And isn't that a creative life, Nina? That as we grow and making art or crafting a beautiful instrument, we are growing that talent and growing into it.
And you learn, annoyingly, you learn by making mistakes.
Yeah, a lot of them. See, here's the beautiful thing. The reason why artists have studios, so you can make your mistakes in private.
Yeah,
That's how
yeah.
I think of my studio. I can try things, do things. And like you said, you work 16 hours on perfecting something and then you got to cut into it. Oh,
Yeah.
hell, I do that all the time, but in the privacy of my studio. So when the piece is finished, oh, no muss, no fuss. It's all together.
Yeah, I've actually found something really funny because I very reluctantly joined social media as a maker because I'll circle back to that, but because I've kind of flipped the switch towards social media, I can now kind of see it as like a portfolio that's just happens to be accessible for folks, which is nice. But it's also a portfolio for me, but because of that, I'm filming myself often. And it's
Hey, listen, I follow you on Instagram, so I know
oh,
exactly what you're
but you
doing,
get to
Nina.
see the very curated, the very edited, as in the I'll pick the nice moments, blah blah blah. But I get to see of the 3 second bit that you get to see, there's like a maybe 20 seconds, 30, 40, a minute. And sometimes, especially when you're like gluing something up, like I see myself do the mistakes or the fuck ups, and like the man's like, I've got a very furrowed brow and I'm very concentrated on this. Like, oh, this is so silly. But like even seeing how I'm moving is like has informed like, oh, that's interesting. Like it made me realize how to do certain things. Being in the privacy of your own workshop is a bit intoxicating. And I think recently in the beginning of June, I went to a course down in Somerset, which is like the south of England. The British Violin Making Association, of which I'm a member, they teach a lot of courses throughout the year, and they go to a place called Hallsway Manor. It's this beautiful English manor house. Everything is catered. You've got your own room. It's eye-wateringly expensive, but it's fine. It's an investment in your own business. All of a sudden, I went from being in my own little stone cottage, tinkering away, to like being in a group of 9 people doing two very specific things. I had such a wobble of just like I don't think I had very much a, like I don't deserve to be here, very imposter syndrome. But then after like the second day, I had a bit of a meltdown, and then someone gave me a bit of a pep talk, and they also said like we're all here in the same boat. Like we're all not in our own workshop. We're all stressed out. None of us have fitted this many sound posts on one instrument. Like we're all doing like we're all in the same boat, and it's like fine. Besides struggling a little bit, it was incredibly valuable of just being able to swap ideas and to just talk. And so it was really really good. But yeah, I
Yeah.
couldn't wait to go home. Just like oh.
I want to shift gears a little bit. As a sculptor, I create objects meant to be seen. Your work, on the other hand, is meant to be heard. A violin isn't just looked at, it lives through sound. Does that change how you think about creation?
Yeah, very massively. I think it's shifting a little bit in Newark at the moment. But when I was a student there, to me, it felt very detached from musicians. It felt very detached from the music world. I think I was a bit biased because as a person who went out to bars and pubs a lot in Glasgow, I was in the Glasgow folk scene a lot. So I knew a lot of musicians. So I had a lot more opportunities just handing people instruments and like, or working on theirs. And that kind of disappeared in Newark because it's such a small town. There wasn't a huge amount of players. That to me, it felt very aesthetics only, or you have to make a certain way and that will produce a sound. And I was like, yeah, it's good to start with that. It's been an important part of my making, but I think now that I have a bit more freedom with having my own workshop, I can experiment a bit more with what I want. And it is interesting to just be able to try things out. Maybe I want to try at some point in life to make the same instrument over and over and over again to see what happens. But at the moment, I'm just relishing a bit the let's just find out what each instrument's is gonna sound like. I don't play violin either, so yeah, it catches people off guard a little bit sometimes. With the Storybook Instrument Workshop was interesting because it was a violin maker who didn't play fiddle, there was a harp maker who didn't really play harp, and there was a guitar maker who didn't really play guitar. We were more focused on making, but I wonder if it's sometimes is it good or bad that I don't play the instrument? Yes, I am very much at the behest of a player when it comes to my own instrument. I can't try out my own instrument. I can with cello, I can get a decent sound out of that as a bass player, but I have to get musicians in. I have to translate what they're doing and I have to translate what they're saying and what their opinion is. I think, on the other hand, I think I do sometimes have a bit more of I don't want to say distance, because I think some musicians can get really bogged down with what they want from an instrument or like a certain sound, or if it doesn't fit this incredibly specific idea which they have in their head and which sounds under their ear, it can kind of muddy the waters. And I feel like me as an outsider listening to an instrument as like I don't have to deal with all these preconceived ideas of what a violin should sound like. I just kind of listen to what it looks like and what it sounds like. Sorry. It's one of those things. I think ideally if you want to if you're looking to purchase a new instrument, if you want to buy a violin, if you want to buy a viola or a cello, as a musician, I would say, yep, perfect, go ahead. Call your local luthier, call your local shop, say your budget, and they'll hand you a variety of instruments ideally within your budget, and you try them out. But get one of your pals who also play the instruments to come with. Get them to play it so you can hear it in the room. Because what you are hearing under your ear, as it's called, might be different to how it sounds at the back of concert hall or how it sounds in the room. Sound is a massive, massive part for my making.
So a violin has a voice in a sense. And so as you're working on it, is there a point where you check the voice of the violin as you're working on it? Or is that something that happens at the end when the piece is finished?
I think a little bit of both. I think I don't have enough experience entirely to have it fully boiled down just yet. I think when it comes to, I do a thing called you thickness your fronts and back. So a front and the back of violin isn't all an even thickness. There are different thicknesses all over the body. It needs to be thicker underneath the bridge because there's a lot of pressure from the strings pushing down on the structure. It needs to be a bit thicker. Then you want it thinner around the edges so it almost acts like a speaker cone so it can move. You can do two things. You can flex the plate as it is, and the more flexibility you get, the better, because then it will move more easily. You can listen to the tap tones. You can use machinery for this, or you can use your hands. There's a place on the violin front where you pinch it with two fingers, and there's several places that you can tap, and you can listen to what the tone is. If you've got a fancy machine, which we had in college, you can actually just put tea leaves on it and it makes a shape. Those are the Chladni patterns. And that was I think a Czech scientist who took apart violins and noticed that if you blast certain hertzes at it, it makes a particular pattern. And again, it's where are you on that sliding scale of makers? Am I going to be incredibly engineering and try and get the perfect? Or do I go like, yeah, that's roughly in the same? Because sometimes you get wood fronts and backs that are matched perfectly and you get them all in the right tap tones and they sound great. And sometimes it doesn't. They're like semitones or tones apart. And like no matter where you remove wood, it doesn't shift in the way that you want it to shift. And then you stick it together and it plays and it sounds fine. Like, I also think a new instrument is never going to sound the same ever. It's a living product, wood, in essence. Especially with new instruments, it's going to take, what, 50 odd years before it kind of settles into what it is. So when people want to buy a new instrument, it's like, well, are you ready to go on a journey with your instrument for the next 30 to 50 years? It's pretty wild. People sometimes ask me, like, why would people prefer to buy an older instrument over a new instrument? And well, an older instrument, that learning curve of finding out what your instrument's sound is a lot shorter. I think an old instrument kind of, if it's well maintained, it does the thing straight out of the box. But with a new instrument, it kind of constantly goes up and down, up and down, up and down. It's been bits of trees for most of its life, and now it's been wrestled into a shape. All of a sudden, it's a violin. Now it needs to learn to be a violin.
What you're talking about now is time. And in a world chasing speed, convenience, there's something almost breathtakingly sacred about building an instrument by hand. So when we do that, what do we hold on to? Is it spiritually, culturally, even humanly, when we keep that kind of making alive? And what do we risk losing if we let it go?
This line of question, something that comes to mind, is my most dreaded question when I talk about the process of making. The most annoying question: can't you use a machine for that? I am the machine. It's me.
That's what I'm talking about right there.
Yeah, there's a point to be made about factory-made instruments. It obviously makes instruments available for a lot more people, ideally, because it's cheaper. It lowers the threshold for young people, for example, to try an instrument because they can buy a cheap factory instrument. The downside is that a lot of machine-made stuff is not as refined, so it doesn't sound as good and it doesn't work as good. It's one of the things that breaks my heart as a luthier when I get people in my workshop with their instruments and the setup, for example, is awful. So the setup is everything that kind of evolves the playability of an instrument. There's a lot of things that I can tweak and fix when people come in with like setup jobs. And I think the best example was a cellist I had in a couple of weeks ago and noticed that her string heights were really high. So I said, does your hand hurt after you've been playing for a while when you push down on the string? She said, oh yeah, I'm exhausted. I'm just a bad player. And then I measured it and I said, this is a lovely setup for double bass. This needs to be like half the height of what, no wonder your hands hurt. Oh, I thought it was me. Said, no, your instrument's not working for you. So I can do a thing which is a relatively easy fix. I hand back an instrument to a student and all of a sudden they can play a lot better because it works for them. It's easier. And it's like, so it's sad for me to deal with instruments that have been made badly because it doesn't help the player, because it's not set up correctly or it doesn't move correctly. In an ideal world, I would like to give my instruments away for free to everyone who has not a penny to their names, but wants to learn how to play a viola, whatever. Have the beautiful handcrafted, lovingly made viola, because that will make you want to play it forever. Unfortunately, under capitalism, that doesn't work.
No.
I feel like I have to balance a fine line, as in, I have to remind myself and the world that I'm allowed to charge what I charge because my time is valuable. My time's costly. When things like budget come into my mind, people say, "Oh, that's a bit expensive." It's like, well, I spent years learning this. I now spend hours doing this. I have collected all the tools that I need. I buy all the best materials that I can afford at the moment to make everything work. Like, I'm allowed to ask what I need to make a living, and still I don't. I have 3 jobs at the moment. You know what I mean? Like, typical Highland life, everyone has like 4 jobs. The fact that I make handmade instruments, for me, is it gives me total control of how things are done. And I'm not saying how I do things are the only way to do things, because everything, there's all roads lead to Rome. Everyone, and what works for me doesn't work for someone who's 6'6" with massive hands, you know? And vice versa. I think a lot of women in the trade have struggled for a very long time because a lot of tools were designed for men. I'm a member of the Women in Lutherie group on Facebook. Just hearing other women saying, like, "Oh, I always really struggle with these big planes," and then someone says, "Well, why don't you use a smaller, like use a wee block plane?" And they're like, "Oh, actually, I can do this." It's just like, yeah.
Well, listen, as you say that, I'm 5'2". So in my studio, I designed all my tables for my height on wheels. And when you buy tools, power drills, all these tools were huge.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't until Makita came out with their drills that they were
Mm.
actually, you could put it in your hand. Then after that, that was maybe what, 25, 30 years ago. And then after that, you could start seeing tools made smaller and smaller. And that makes a difference. If you walk into my studio, everything is geared for 5'2". And I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. My
Right.
biggest peeve in Newark, because every all the benches in Newark are historically tiny, and I'm 5'8". I'm not tall for Dutch purposes, but I'm tallish in the UK. But every bench in Newark was so low, and I always call them the Newark Goblin Hunch, because they're on fucking tiny benches, and that's the way you do it in Italy. And just make a bench your height.
Yeah.
Wrong. Like, put it on some casters.
We're hitting the top of the hour. I want to ask you now, looking back, what would you tell the Nina who first peeked into that violin workshop? What would you tell her now that you know about the path taken?
I think I would say find your tribe. I think I was a bit unaware of what I was getting myself into. I think because it is still a very male dominated world, and I was a bit lucky because, like, the lads in Glasgow were great. There was no sense of competition. It was just a very different mindset. But like, my class in Newark was very competitive, the least competitive person on the planet. So that was difficult to navigate. But yeah, I think find your tribe, because I joined the Women in Lutherie pretty much when I first started. I went straight into self-employment out of college, which is a bit unorthodox. Most people work in a workshop for ages, and then I didn't want to, because I didn't want to work for a male boss, if I'm honest. So, and then again, the stars aligned, the workshop, my flat in Glasgow, like everything just lined up. So I just went, fuck it, let's just try it. Yeah, when I joined the Women in Lutherie group, which is a private Facebook group of all things, and it's just like for women by women, it was nice to be able to ask a question online about, like, hey, how do I do a certain repair, and not be barraged by just misogynist answers of like, well, I've been doing this for 40 years and you little girls shouldn't be doing that in the first place. Oh, okay, Brad. Can I just get the answer, please? And it was a very comforting, welcoming, safe space that I then felt like, this is how I want to be in my own workshop as well. I'd like to be as open as possible, not just to women. I'd like to be open, ideally, to everyone, but especially women, and especially people of color, or any letter in the alphabet is welcome, kind of thing. It's like, there can be too much hurt in the trade sometimes. It's definitely changing. I think the trade is changing a lot. I think a lot of people are shifting from the I have had to suffer for my craft, therefore you have to suffer as next generation. I think social media has a huge influence. I think a lot of stuff is more readily available. People are very willing to share. I always say a lot of American luthiers love to share and love to give their information. I love it. It's like great. I think us Europeans can take a note of that in all honesty. Yes, I do think Scotland is still in the European Union, but it was great. And like the Women in Luthier group also gave the opportunity to become a member of their fellowship program. So they've run it a couple of years. I think it's a bit on a low burner at the moment, but it was basically a mentoring program. I was matched with someone who's been in the trade for a very long time as a newcomer, and it's like they mentored me online for a couple of months. And then I spent 4 weeks with Melanahe Martin in Baltimore, Maryland at the time. And just being able to, like, for 4 weeks, we were in her workshop doing just restorations, and like, she's a queer woman herself. It was a bubble, but it was a very enjoyable bubble of just like her sharing all the information that she would have wanted to know when she was my age, just starting out in the trade. And it's like, not so much like, here are all my horror stories, but it's like, oh, it took me 10 years to figure out that you need to look at this whenever that happens. It's like, oh, great. So I'm now working on something where I recently remembered that particular bit of information. It's like, oh yeah, I need to like shave off that end just a wee bit and then it fits. And it's just, yeah, it's very good. But find your tribe. It's very important to find your people and make space available as well. I tend to try and stay away from this scarcity model of like, oh, but there's so many violin makers, it's all very competitive. No, there's enough musicians, there's enough instruments, and you can find a way to make it work.
Well, Nina, you don't just make violins, you give them stories, spine, and soul. I really appreciate your candor in how you approach making beautiful instruments and also the back and forth of the people that you need in your life and the people you don't need in your life. And the way you talked about that is really quite heartening. And so, here from your little Highland house to every musician's hand, your work carries a kind of quiet magic that lingers long after that last note.
I still, and I hope to hold on to this feeling until I eventually die behind my workbench, is that the first time you hear your instrument played by someone, oh, beautiful. It's something like you worked on it for so long and you get a bit like fucking blinkers on, and all of a sudden for it to then leave your
Yeah.
nest, as it were, and especially an instrument is, it's the tool that a musician uses to make music, which is already a type of magic. Because I'm always impressed with just handing a musician an instrument, like they've never played this instrument before. They're used to their own instrument. And if they still manage to make beautiful music, I don't know how people do that. Make it seem effortless as well. It's really impressive. But yeah, I really hope on that every instrument I'm going to be like, oh, like I think the best compliment I got recently about an instrument was that the musician played like one bow stroke and went, "Four." Like, yeah, that's what I want. That's not too much to ask, I hope.
No, it isn't. Well, Nina, thank you for coming on Filled to Capacity today. It was just such a joy to hear you talk. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. I didn't realize how quick the hour went. Oh, I can talk about my work for hours. I sometimes tell people, just tell me to shut up.
No, I love that about you. Okay, listeners, thank you for joining us today and take care. Bye.